A very good morning to you. My name is Daniel Wahome and welcome to Sports Check on this Monday morning. It is the first day of March 2021. Happy new month to everyone and lots of conversation around sport. We're going to be talking about rugby. Competitive rugby is back for the Kenyan teams. That's at club level and at international level. And we'll be having a former Kenya Sevens coach and a person who's also played for Kenya Sevens, Felix Ochieng, to break down what was happening in Madrid and also in Nairobi, Nakuru and Kakamega. We should also be having a conversation about athletics because on Wednesday, the Confederation of African Athletics made an announcement that the postponement of the Africa Cross Country Championships is on. Barnaba Korir, who's an Athletics Kenya Executive Committee member, will be telling us all about it and also the calendar that's changing by the day. We shall also be having a conversation about football. Remember that KBC Channel 1, the entire family is your true sports partner. The CAF Under-20 Championship, the Africa Cup of Nations for that age group. We also had the CAF Champions League matches yesterday. And coming in the week, the DFB Pokal. So all that and more as we keep up with what's happening in the news, including the one story where the selection panel that was appointed by President Uhuru Kenyatta, and this is to appoint the chairperson and one commissioner of the Teachers Service Commission is getting to work this morning, and this is at the Public Service Commission offices. So the panel that is going to be chaired by Mr. Thomas Koyer is going to be inaugurated officially this morning. That's at around 11 a.m. That's one of the stories that we are going to be following up on. And we get straight into a conversation, and the first one's about rugby. And they say rugby teaches character, and a lot of character has had to be exhibited over the weekend. Shuja, they were in Spain for the Madrid Sevens, played over 2 weekends. This weekend that came to a close, and also on the weekend of the 20th and 21st of February. Shuja, that's the men's team, they won all the matches with the exception of those that they played against Argentina. Incidentally, they were the last matches at the round-robin phase and also in the finals of those two tournaments. And straight into conversation with Felix Ochieng. And Felix, a very good morning to you.
And a good morning to you too.
And first, overall, this is a team that you've handled, some of the players you've seen grow. Your take on Shuja at the Madrid Sevens?
I think, first of all, we need to recognize the fact that a lot of these teams are getting back into playing after a long year off because of COVID and the pandemic. So it was always going to be interesting with regards to their results and how they're going to fare against opposition. I think everyone was trying to see where they're in terms of fitness, structures and everything. In terms of consistency, obviously that was impressive to see that we're able to put back-to-back wins, and play with some form of structure. And I think because a lot of players were also playing against each other, with each other, the players have just been brought in by the head coach, Namco. So what we see is that teams that were trying to gel with each other, and it was all the other teams, Portugal, Spain, USA, mix and match after a whole year layoff, coming back. So I think the consistency in performance was impressive, and there's a lot of learnings and improvements that we've seen going forward, and it was exciting, apart from the exception, which I think we'll talk about later.
We'll talk about Argentina in detail,
yes,
because that's
exactly
a whole story by itself. But let's first of all look at Saturday's results. 26-12 against Portugal, yes. And this is a Portugal side that they played with a week before, and the result was 36-5. The difference in results?
I think, first of all, you're playing 5 days apart. You're playing one Saturday and another Saturday. It's always very, very difficult, also replicated in the World Seven Series, to change and chop match during that time. And teams get to learn from each other, so it's almost like you're playing this weekend and then the next weekend you're back. So Portugal obviously have improved, and learned a few things in terms of there. And that's why I'm saying it's important to note that the consistency in those wins against those other teams is what we need to be consistent about, and that is actually what was happening. And I think, as you can see, match fitness was improving. There's no substitute for match fitness. So the more you play, the better you become, as I think. So I think in terms of the difference of the gaps, it's just that, they've been in camp, they've been the same. The coaches have analyzed the other teams, and I think we did enough and were consistent enough to still, outplay them in the second round, despite the fact that the score was short, the gap was smaller.
Spain was the exception. It's the one team that, kind of gave Kenya a hard time yesterday, considering that the first match was 19-5. Again, 19 points for Shuja yesterday, but Spain seemed to be finding some ways around the team.
Yeah, I think Spain for the longest time, and obviously have been the most consistent team, also coming for Safari 7. So I think they know our terrain, they know our boys. And when you look at even the World 7 series in 2019 and 2020, Spain have always put up some amazing performances and made it to a few quarterfinals. In terms of their structures and what they're doing, Spain are always one of those teams where you don't give them opportunity. They play with a lot of passion, their levels of skill and their basics are very, very well. And they've always been, it's just one of those teams that when Kenya Sevens plays, they always, almost can I say, they have our number. They always give us a hard time, but it was always important to come out with a win because they're a pretty good side.
Let me talk about the US. And if you look at say from the 2017 season, post the Olympics, let me put it that way, the United States have been knocking on the doors, of trying to lift the series. But here was a US side that Kenya beat twice.
Yeah, I think for the US and Adam McFriday, he's never afraid of trying out new things or trying out new players or just starting from where he left off. Obviously, they've had a very, very good squad over the years. They've been very consistent, their structures, and they're a side who, as you've mentioned, really, really, really have been consistent at the world level. And you mentioned knocking on the doors of even winning a series, the year when Fiji just took it away from the jaws. Basically, there are a lot of players who are now being given the opportunity to prove themselves in that squad. A lot of players who've been there before, trying to show positions of leadership. So for me, as you can see, the way USA was playing, obviously it's not a result that they wanted in terms of consistency, but I think they're going to learn from that, and I think they'll go back to the drawing board like everyone else and come back better. So that's what I believe. I think for Kenya also. For the USA, it's like, these are the players you've been put in a position, to represent and make that position yours, understand the processes and execute. So it's a great learning point. It'll be interesting to see what the team comprises of, in the next warm-up tournament.
Now, let's talk about Chile. This is a country that has got a very huge history when it comes to rugby in South America. They love the sport, they play it well. Your take on how they played, and this was as an additional side for the second weekend of the Madrid Sevens?
Yeah, I think the beauty about Sevens, especially for countries like, Chile, Spain, Brazil.
Uruguay.
Yeah, Uruguay. They've really, really picked up the game, and it has also increased the development of the sport in that region. And obviously, we would like to argue and say, obviously coming from a very passionate and skillful level in terms of football, it would be easy for them to transform into the game. So Chile's, they'll not fall short of passion. They'll not fall short of excitement, and not short of taking up opportunities. I think where they fall short is that they just haven't played enough at that level, and also in terms of building their strength level, because it's all about strength as well at that particular level. So if you look at the Chileans and teams like Uruguay, I think it's just a matter of how well they step up into the game. And the more games they play, the more we will be seeing them in various tournaments and putting up performances. So it's impressive to see the game, spread into countries like Chile, because it's good for the sport and it's good for the country. It's good to keep it going.
Now, let's talk about Argentina. 4 losses against Argentina. And if you were to consider this, that in this season, Argentina has stood out, and their 15th side defeated New Zealand. It was a shock result, but let's look at their 7th side. What is it that they are doing right at this point in time?
I think for Argentina, even coming from the backdrop of the World 7 series just before the pandemic, other than being excited in taking up their options, they've obviously very, 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 very consistent in their basics. All right, and that's one of their play. In terms of open play, they're also one of those teams that keep the ball alive and take the opportunities when they're going. And it's one of those teams that never give up. If you see how they're playing, they never give up. And credit to the coaching team for them to pick up from where they left and to come into these two tournaments at the Madrid Sevens and be consistent throughout. For the longest time, we know Argentina will always be a force to reckon with. They've got a team, and they are always also not afraid to experiment with young players and coming through and give them an opportunity. So it's exciting to see Argentina come through. Obviously, not at the expense of Kenya Sevens, but obviously it was we were the track end of that. And I think they also, for me as a former Kenya Sevens coach, I think the management team are very analytical in terms of how they play the different teams. If you saw along both, I think they play according to who they're playing, and they seem to minimize their weaknesses and identify areas in which and take the opportunities. So I think that one they were very we fell short, unable to counter that for the number of games we played them over the 7 days, and that's a worrying point.
And I want to bring out something I noticed when it comes to the Kenya Sevens team, and I will talk about two scenarios where there were mauls. One was against Chile, and eventually the ball was stolen away, right inside there. The second one is where you have about 6 Kenyan players against 1 Argentine player, and then he just did a basketball pass from inside the ball, and it was a try. How physical are our boys at the moment?
As mentioned, it was always going to be very exciting, coming from a year where they haven't played in the competition. And I've mentioned before that it's very difficult to substitute match fitness. So what this tournament did, it allowed us and it allowed our team to gauge where they are physically, from a strength and conditioning point of view, to gauge where we are, in terms of our endurance, and obviously to gauge where we are in terms of that particular endurance over a period of 14 minutes. Now, in terms of strength, obviously there are areas where I know they will come back and they know now that they need to work on. And then obviously with regards to their structures, many things went well. But obviously the scenario that you're talking about, and happens quite a bit in rugby, is where you get into a situation where you overchase, you all congregate towards the ball. So if that ball is moved away from a crowded space to an open space, then it leaves open on that side. So I think it's just a matter of the team and the players scanning and taking an opportunity to see where are they on the pitch, and the responsibility of that person to ensure that the ball doesn't come out. Because if you chase the ball to one end, you have to ensure that the ball doesn't come out from that end, or you either slow it down to allow your team. So I think that's one of the areas that we really needed to pick up, to stop over chasing the ball to the end. And if we get to that point, make sure that the ball doesn't come out back into the open space. So it's not that it's one of those situations, and sevens is such a short game that you only have one opportunity to make the right kind of decisions, either in defense and attack. And that's just an example of where we did not make the right decision and resulted in, obviously, points for Argentina.
How well is the team responding to defensive duties, from the transition from attack to defense, or from defense to attack?
Yeah, I think that's obviously something interesting. It also has a lot to do with the levels of fitness, because with teams that are operating at that particular level, like Argentina, who are shifting the ball very quickly, between the set pieces, it's one of those things where I don't think all the players were at the same level in terms of that one, and you need all players to be able to transition more or less at the same, or understand their structures and everything. So as I mentioned, it was a learning, for them to be able to say, okay, fine, this is an area that hasn't worked out for us in terms of how we transition into from attack or to defense. But at the same time, how do we ensure, our one-on-one tackles and ball retention, we ensure that we keep it at where it is. So I saw a lot of areas that obviously will need improving. And I think, as mentioned, after a whole year out on the pandemic, I think the players then, the more they play together and train together, the more now they understand how to transition. And when you play different teams, different attack styles and everything, then you learn how to chop and change and how to gauge whether your structures on defense are working and whether we're transitioning quick enough. Obviously, there are examples, like you've noticed, that allowed other teams to get opportunities. And when you start bringing in other teams, that are consistent in the World Series, it just means that we really now need to be a bit more sharp and a bit more decisive in making our decision.
Now, I want you to mention 3 things from 3 perspectives. Number 1, what needs to be retained as far as the style of play is concerned, what needs to be improved, and what actually needs to be totally changed.
So the first one was, what needs to be...
What needs to be retained? What do you keep?
What do we keep? I think for me, our ball carries, whether in and out of space, was very key. We've got people who, when they got the gap, they went as fast as possible. For what that meant is that we're using our physicality and our speed to get to the ball as far as possible into the field. And that obviously was drawing defenders. So, when we're able to retain 3 phases and the ball comes out, it was very easy for us to push. And I think also in terms of how we were kicking, our kickoffs were very, very good with Willie, getting another ball. We're always putting other teams under pressure. I think also with USA. So those were very, very good from the lads in terms of kick. So that one we retain. The next one was, what do we
improve?
What do we need to...
What you can say, this is going right, but it can get better.
Okay, I think despite the fact that with regards to the phases, we're getting our phases in, but I think we can be more clinical in terms of our consistency, in terms of our executing our basics. So if we take the ball in for a rack, we should ensure that the ball comes out, and then our passes, should be put into the space to where the players are. And I think that's one of the things that we're doing, but we can do well in terms of our basics. I don't think we struggle with physicality and strength and everything, but if we're able to execute our basics better, whether it's our tackling, our passing, our rack attack or defense, then it means that we'll be a bit more consistent in drawing in defenders and putting our players in space.
And finally, what needs 100%? What needs an overhaul, if you were to, from your coaching eyes?
I see that players are finding themselves in a decision when they line break, there's always the temptation to offload.
Aha.
Yes, we had a lot of those opportunities because the fact that, you break the line and they made the tackle. I mean, we've got big boys and people who are able to release their hands, and some offloads didn't work, as you noticed.
Yes.
It ended up in the opposition's hands. Personally, for our kind of game, I would not make it a policy in terms of offloading. I would rather formulate a policy where knowing when not to offload. We should try and go as far as possible and knowing when not to offload. So we shouldn't go into a game saying, if I make a break, I should always try and toss the ball and look, because I've made a break, so I'm sure my players are behind. But it should be like, is this the best decision to offload at this point, or should I just go as far as possible and then create a platform?
Don't be Fiji.
Yeah, just play. And I think the players will be able to make a decision when not to offload. I'm not saying when to offload, because everyone they'll know when to, but they'll get into a position where, listen, I'm in this position, let me consolidate, let me play inwards into the game, leg carry as much as possible, stay on my feet as much as possible until my team comes, and then we play, which speaks now to the phases, because the more we do that, it means that teams then have to transition quicker into defense, allowing us to use our players out wide, our speed in terms of that and our strength.
Very well. Now let's talk about the Kenya Lioness. We are speaking with Felix Ochieng. He is a former coach of the Kenya national 7 side, Shujaa. Kenya Lioness were also in Madrid, and on the weekend of the 20th and 21st, it was a weekend to forget. They played all their matches, and there were 6 teams involved. They did not win a single game. But this weekend, there was a whole change of results. 17-5 that lost to Russia, but they defeated Spain 22-0, and Poland defeated Kenya 12-10 before they lost in the final 19-0 last evening. And the Kenya Lioness at the moment, we've seen a full transition. There seems to be a transition. It's, if you were to look at the side 3-4 years ago, it looks like it's now half those who are there and half of younger players who are coming in.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable in terms of transitioning into players, and it's important that we keep on, especially the Kenya Lionesses, where women's rugby is picking up, to keep on identifying younger players who, the league, the women's league was played on Sunday.
On Sunday, yes,
yeah,
in Nakuru.
So yes, in Nakuru. So there are lots of people coming through because of the amount of rugby that's been played, and credit to the clubs and the structures around the women games, allowing them to play a lot and talented to come through. So I think now it has been a deliberate decision, and the coach obviously hails from those areas and has worked with women for a long time. It's important that we start building these young players into the squad, because as you've mentioned rightfully, we've had a squad that have done us justice for the longest time. And the reason for that also is because they do not have too many tournaments to play. All right? So you end up working with the same squad, for qualification, for the Olympics and stuff like that. But now that their tournaments are becoming more consistent, all right, it means that we have to start introducing new players and building our pool, our base of players for the women's to be able to feed into the national team, because I believe there's talent. I believe they're passionate about it and stuff like that. So now it's going to become more and more difficult to maintain probably the same kind of players from that particular area, especially now that we're in 2021. You know, a lot of those players who've taken us through the last 10 years, you know, and credit to them for bringing the sport to where it is, you know. But it's time that we keep on now working with fresh blood in terms of young, talented players, while at the same time exposing them to many tournaments, you know, whether satellite and international. The unfortunate thing is that, you know, our mobility and the pandemic is not allowing us to do that, all right? So any opportunity means that we've got to take it.
Now, and you know, on the weekend of the 20th and 21st, playing against France, playing against the United States, playing against Russia, playing against Spain, it was a really tough call for the Lionesses, considering that all these teams are core in the Women's World Series. And for the Lionesses, when do they get to play? And they play Dubai, get invited to France, maybe Hong Kong when they're going for the qualifiers, and the Africa Cup Sevens. What else? I mean, how well do you see them play?
I mean, now that's the harsh reality of sport. You know, once we found ourselves in that position and we've qualified for Olympics and we keep on invited for Dubai, we are now in a position where, you know, once we're in that position and we want to be considered the best or to pit ourselves against the best, we have no excuses, all right? The opportunities are amazing, and it's a harsh reality, because when you get into that level and you're playing against core team, you know, they've played tournaments in Europe, they've played amongst themselves in the US and stuff like that. So it makes it very difficult if you're not getting match fitness or if you're not playing consistently either within your region or within opposition where you've created like in a camp and say you're always playing. So now we're in that position, what next? And that weekend, as you said, it was tough learning. You know what, if we want to go into the series, it means that we've got to play those particular teams day in, day out. And you saw they were absolutely ruthless. You know, they take no prisoners at that particular level. And they were always going to try and have a balance between match fitness while executing their structures. Because those are teams that have been used to that and know we've played at this level, we can keep going and stuff like that. So we're in that position. What do we do next? There's a lot that needs to be done as well. And that whatever needs to be done needs to be complemented by fixtures, by tournaments, because, you know, training all through without gauging where you are, you know, then it shows. So now we should start from there and say these were the results, you know, and credit to them, you know, they went out and they held their own. You know, you could see, you know, the Lionesses are now starting to show some levels. You know, they're not going, they may have lost all the games, but it's not embarrassing. All right?
Yes.
You know, it's not like, oh, you guys lost all the game. I mean, Kenya Sevens were there once before. We used to go and lose all games on a weekend. Then we win one game, and then slowly. So also, not that we want to be patient, but we also got to understand that this is the starting point, and from there we pick up the learnings and we move, as you rightfully mentioned, following the next weekend. I
will pick out something that came out from the weekend, and this is because the teams were in a bubble when they were in Madrid, and that meant that every 3 or 4 days they had to take a PCR test, that's a test for coronavirus, and there were some false positives, but the United States team, the women's team specifically, decided that they were not going to participate as a cautionary measure. How much of an impact did that decision have overall on the tournament, Felix?
Yeah, I think obviously you don't want to see teams not participating, especially after traveling and training, especially for the players. You know, it's really tough. You really want to get out there, play and pitch yourself against these other teams. We're obviously playing within a pandemic, and we understand that obviously sport, you know, it's one of those things that is obviously leading the charge in terms of how we are managing this, because we've got so many sports people playing. Obviously, the USA pulling out obviously then affected the format, and we know the USA as a team obviously are forced to reckon with in the series. So you want to have them in the tournament, and though it's unfortunate they're not there, I mean, you've got to, player welfare obviously still comes at the forefront. You know, you've got to put, not the player, as we always say with the pandemic, it's not you as an individual, but it's about protecting others. You know, so they didn't want to. So it actually affected the tournament, and I think it's tough on the players as well. But I think it was, you know, it was the right decision, you know, for the welfare and understanding of all the other teams that were participating.
Now it's turning out that in this coronavirus times, the team manager is a very important cog as far as planning is concerned. From what you have seen and from the conversations you've had in the rugby circles, what are the biggest learning lessons when it comes to planning around these things? Having players in a bubble, organizing for the coronavirus tests, ensuring that players stick to the regulations, and also ensuring that in playing conditions, everything is safe for them.
Yeah, I think no one expected us to be faced in this particular situation going forward, and obviously it's been very, very challenging because it's a pandemic. Every little thing that you're doing, whether you're doing bubbles, whether you're doing player monitoring, contact tracing and testing, it requires resources, sometimes materialistic and sometimes financially. If you're going to do everything possible to keep your players safe, then you have to have all those things in place. So as you've mentioned, your team managers and your doctors have now become key cogs in ensuring that you're delivering your players safe and they're playing in a safe environment, including the environment, and the other team that they're playing. So they've become very, very key. And this has to be supported. Unfortunately, you cannot do that alone. You have to be supported, other than the guidelines, by the resources to be able to test within certain times. When you're talking about a bubble, there's obviously a cost implication to keeping players within a bubble. If we had the way we would keep players in a bubble like what they're doing, in Europe, and they do it with football and the Premier League. So you keep players away from home for the duration of 3 months, and you only have a period where they go and spend time with family. They come back, they're tested and everything like that. So it's becoming, it's a learning, but we've got to learn very, very fast. And I think a lot of stakeholders, whether it's from the federation, the union, the players, the Ministry of Health, a lot has to be done because we're learning every single day when they come back. And if we're going to replicate that locally, a lot needs to pay focus on that particular one.
And overall, the same three things you spoke about Shujaa, and now let me talk about the Lioness. What to keep, what to improve, what to overhaul. Yeah,
I think in general, I think in terms of the players, first of all, it's to keep working with those players that they had over there, and look at areas to improve on those particular players. Main thing is to keep, because even the Lionesses, we are starting to see a certain style. We know when we line break, we've got the ability to either go to the very end. So we should continue, trying to take up the opportunities when we see the gap. It means that we should be a bit more, intelligent in terms of that. So that we should just keep working with the players and ensuring then that because we could see the spirit.
Yes.
The spirit of the Shujaa and Lionesses coming out. Kenya is always that team that brings a bit of excitement. And obviously the dancing after tries.
We are the land of the lion.
Yes, exactly. So the excitement, when Kenya plays, there's excitement because you don't know what they're going to dance to. Yeah, they did that and then stuff. So that excitement, and because players should be enjoying themselves. So I think as a team, that camaraderie and bond that's been created, that I've seen in both squads, needs to be maintained. In terms of, next was what to change.
Improvement?
Oh, improvement. I think, as I've mentioned, consistency in how we execute our basics. We just keep doing the same things, working on our passing, working on our running lines, working on our rack attack and defense and stuff like that. I think those particular things, because everything else then will fall in place. Because we always line break. We have opportunity with the ball in hand, but just the little things, let us down. It's amazing at that level if the best teams just consistently perform the basics right, at that particular level. So I think that should be a focus as well. And if they do that, whether it's tackle, pass, run, catch, I think would be consistent and would now be knocking on the doors of being very consistent in capturing.
The overhaul that needs to be done?
I will not move away from the offloads.
The whole thing about flamboyance.
It's good, but you have to train. You have to train. Players make decisions when they're in space, the right kind of decision, and sometimes they work. And that's why I keep on saying knowing when not to offload, because you will know when to offload. All right? Because I think we find ourselves in very, very good spaces. Rather than offload, maybe get ourselves in and out of that space and into a better position, either to create a platform or to give the ball. Because the women also, because people understand it. The opposition is, if a Kenyan player line breaks and I'm slower, if they're about to be caught up, it's more than likely they're going to offload. So they start running within our lines. Then you offload and then the ball is turned over.
That is Felix Ochieng with his, take on the Kenya Lioness, who are in Madrid. They lost in the final of the second weekend, 19 points to 0 to Russia last night. And also, the Kenya Cup is back, and some teams already missing. The Ngong Road gang, Impala, Homeboys, Nondis, and also Mwamba for a club. And you've got to look at Mwamba. They actually are looking for a new home. And first of all, before I even get into how the play went down, your take on how would I describe it? I mean, the absence of these four teams.
Yeah, I think as mentioned, always we've talked about the new norm, okay? And obviously we all wanted Kenya Cup to resume. Kenya Cup has resumed under different circumstances, where there are a lot of factors to be considered. Around the pandemic, around COVID testing, around tracing, around hospitalization. Because that is obviously key. Now, when you drop down to the club level, it basically means now you're dealing with clubs have to take so much responsibility and plan for that. And 15s, it's not like 7s. So you're talking about 40, 50 players in training, right? And then you're going into fixtures. So I understand, in terms of the 4 clubs that are missing, maybe they felt that they're not in a position, to start going by their own protocols, all right? Maybe they also felt that it's not sufficient. The assurances that they're being given are not sufficient. So you cannot, because player welfare is put first. I'd like to remove, the politics out of it. If
Actually, don't touch the politics.
Yeah, if I feel that my players will not be safe, then it's a decision that they need to make, because the club is responsible to those parents and friends and relatives of those particular people. So until they get to a point where they feel that they are ready, or they feel that the protocols are in place, then so be it, then they will be able to come in. So that is my take on it, because as clubs, every club took a decision, and said, okay, fine, we are happy with the resources and with the prescribes that one will. Others said we are not happy, so we'll take a sit back and see until we feel that we're in a position to, or until we feel that we have enough resources to do that. So you cannot, blame them. Would like all of them to be there, but it's a club decision.
What's the ideal time to get, a team ready for action in 15s rugby?
I mean, you need, first of all, a pre-season that obviously lasts not less than 8 weeks before you start going into your match fitness and readiness. And I think other teams also may feel that are not ready, especially in terms of their physical conditioning, that they did not have enough time to get their players ready to start Kenya Cup this particular time. And that can be you have to be very, very cautious and cognizant of that particular fact. So 2 things may have happened, First of all, obviously with the pandemic and sponsorship has pulled out, you can't gather into training. It varies between different clubs who have been able to consistently keep their players in session, and others who've been, institutionally been able to keep their players going at that particular level. But from a leadership, from a club point of view, first of all, you go back to the drawing board. You say, how are we going to sustain just ensuring that we're able to get our players to train? How do we support them? How were they doing it before? Because the sport is still amateur. Remember, it's not professional. So the clubs dig deep a lot just to get their players going. And kudos to the clubs that have been doing that. But the biggest factor for this one is, most of the clubs felt that they were not ready from a strength and conditioning point of view, or physically, to be able to play now.
Now, there was a baptism of fire for Masinde Muliro University of Science and Technology. They lost 56-0 to Kabras Sugar in the Kakamega Derby. What kind of, response should Masinde Muliro have? Because looking at the teams that are there, they'll have to play against KCB, they'll have to play against First Rising Oilers side, they'll have to play against Strathmore and Blood. Yeah.
For the longest time, there's a time where, the teams, when you get relegated, the teams that came up, were able to hold their own. But over the past 4 or 5 years, once the relegation started, it's been more or less the same. We saw a Kisumu side qualify for Kenya Cup, and same kind of results. So it's a case of you come up and you go down immediately, because when keeping up with that levels at the top requires more than just qualification. And we're seeing it now with Masinde Muliro, which was bound to happen, because I mean, credit to Masinde Muliro for making it to Kenya Cup for the first time, you know, and they beat Mean Machine to get there. So it's tough for these university sides, but it's also, I find it's a blessing that we're able to see university rugby now coming up, because that is where the bed of young players are. They're able to keep them over a period. The successes of Mean Machine, Strathmore have been a good example of it. USAU had their moments as well. And I'm urging those universities to keep those structures going. Now for Masinde Muliro, it's going to be very, very tough, because now they're gaining their learnings by playing. You know, when you thought, because they qualified, what, 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, so you can't really prepare with other teams in Kenya Cup that have been preparing for Kenya Cup, and you are preparing to qualify. You know, so it also questions our technical structures at the university level. Are we preparing our players at that particular level in terms of strength, physical conditioning, to be able to withstand the physicality of Kenya Cup? Is there such a big divide between Kenya Cup and the championship?
Oilers 39, Kenya Harlequin 13.
Yeah, that was an interesting score. I'll not speak.
You can tell a queen when you see one.
No, I'm very neutral. But anyway, yeah, I think first of all, obviously, credit to Oilers. I mean, we've seen Oilers grow in the last 2 years. They've been very consistent. I think their management has done very well to work with their players. We saw them through the sevens. And obviously this is an example of the work that they've done, you know, so credit for where they are and what they've been doing. Obviously, being a Harlequin is not the result you wanted to see, and because we're getting there. But as I mentioned, the teams haven't played for a very long time, and despite the fact that I'm not giving any excuses, but I think we have to just give credit where it's due. You know, Oilers, you know, they got there with a win and everything, and it's for teams like Harlequins and every other team that lost, you know, to go back to the drawing board and come back next week with a more positive attitude towards the game.
All right, Felix Ochieng, former coach of the national 7-side team, Shuja, speaking to us about rugby. And I want you to give a closing word. Impala 17-5 winners at the KRE Women's Festival. Your closing word on this and the impact it's going to have going forward, especially that it's an Olympic year.
I think on women's rugby, that is amazing, you know, in terms of them being able to play out. That is something that we encourage clubs to do. We encourage the federations to support and stakeholders, you know, and congratulations to those clubs that are pushing women's rugby, because that is where the future is. And on Olympics, generally, obviously, it's an interesting year as well. Heading into the Olympics, we've seen a lot of traction with the teams that have qualified. So it's exciting, you know, that we are having lots of teams. The spirit of going into the Olympics is well true and alive going forward, and I think the teams have been doing well to prepare. So for me, parting shot, you know, is just to keep the faith, stay in the race as well, and then wishing all those teams all the best in the preparation, and we do what we can in various positions to support them. It will be an exciting year.
Felix Ochieng, he is a former coach of the Kenya 7 side, breaking us down everything to do about the Kenya Sevens. They were in Madrid for about 3 weeks and played in 2 tournaments, the Madrid International, the weekend of the 20th and 21st, and this weekend that has just passed. And for Shuja, finishing second twice for the Kenya Lioness, playing in the final yesterday and eventually getting a win after 7 straight losses. Thank you very much, Felix.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, we'll continue having the conversation about our national teams. We can see you're well labeled as Team Kenya. We know you're involved going into an Olympic year. We'll be taking a short break, and we get back, we'll be speaking about athletics, because for Team Kenya, there has had to be some reorganization. They were to travel to Lome, Togo this week, but that's not going to happen. We'll be speaking with Barnab Korir, who is a member of the Athletics Kenya Executive Committee, about that and much more. A short